There are companies that manufacture pills, and there are companies that manufacture fear. Gamora Pharmaceuticals, with its polished floors, smiling reception desks, and executive offices gleaming high above the city, has learned to produce both in generous supply. Behind every glass wall and every tasteful lamp sits the same old machinery: greed, vanity, corruption, and the faint chemical smell of trouble already in progress. At the front of this glittering madhouse sits Nadine, soft-spoken, sweet-natured, and far too innocent for the kingdom of wolves in which she earns her pay. Not far away is Bella, all lipstick, poise, and sharpened ambition, the kind of woman who can make cruelty seem almost elegant. Moving quietly through the halls is Junior, the gentle little mail clerk who knows everybody's secrets, tells the truth with dangerous sincerity, and somehow survives in a place where honesty ought to be fatal. Below them, in the basement laboratory where common sense has long since been declared unnecessary, waits Stebner, the company's battered architect of impossible things, forever building one more catastrophe for the good of the firm. Standing guard over today's disaster is Animal, the latest well-dressed enforcer hired to protect bad people from the consequences of their own appetites. And over all of them, from office, screen, or sickbed, rules the old man, founder, tyrant, and black-hearted sovereign of the whole rotten empire, a man so mean that even his own family speak in his presence as though every sentence might be their last. This is Gamora Pharmaceuticals, where polished surfaces conceal monstrous intentions, where science serves the highest bidder, and where even the smallest bright idea can become a nightmare by quitting time. And on this particular day, the nightmare will begin, as so many modern nightmares do, with a simple little test. There are many ways to control a man. You can frighten him, you can tempt him, you can shame him, you can make him desperate enough to buy whatever relief is being sold by the same smiling people who made him feel broken in the first place. And if you happen to own the laboratory, the diagnosis, the drug, the doctors, and the advertising budget, then all that remains is to convince the public of one simple, devastating idea: that they were never well to begin with. At Gamora Pharmaceuticals, such ideas are not merely entertained. They are funded, trademarked, and distributed nationwide. Tonight's lesson in chemical compassion, algorithmic cruelty, and corporate mercy arrives in the form of a little questionnaire, a harmless modern convenience, a machine with all the warmth of a confession booth and all the moral restraint of a Shark Tank. Its name, naturally, is Progress, and its destination, as always, is somewhere inside the atomic zone. At Gamora Pharmaceuticals, billions of dollars had already been poured into the launch of Ophidian. Officially, Ophidian was a breakthrough in mental wellness, a gentle stabilizer, a mood-elevating advance in modern care, the kind of product whose television commercials would one day feature women laughing in wheat fields while a soothing voice hurried through 36 side effects in under 6 seconds. Unofficially, employees called it Snake Ozil, because Ophidian did not cure very much, except perhaps the user's ability to remember why they were taking it. It got people pleasantly high, softened the edges of reality, created a warm and temporary faith that everything was somehow fine, and left behind exactly the sort of dependency Gamora considered repeat business. The only problem was that nobody wanted it. Even after endless bribes, lavish conferences, aggressive physician incentives, mountains of samples, and glossy pamphlets featuring unnaturally serene adults holding coffee mugs by sunny windows, the public had remained stubbornly unenthusiastic. And so, one afternoon in Nedry's office, high above the city, a strategy meeting had been called. Nedry lounged behind his desk, wired and theatrical, the kind of man who dressed like success and sweated like guilt. Bella sat nearby in perfect command of herself, all red lipstick, cold intelligence, and the simmering rage of a woman forced to share oxygen with her brother. Near the door stood their newest bodyguard, a slab of expensive muscle in a tailored suit known only as Animal. And on the wall-mounted television, larger than life and uglier for it, appeared the old man. Not yet the decaying electrical tyrant he would later become, but already ancient, already vicious, already terrifyingly well-groomed. His silver hair was immaculate. His suit could have paid a year's rent for an ordinary family. His eyes held the bright hatred of a man who believed compassion to be a clerical error. Bella was the first to say it. "The problem," she said coolly, "is that people don't know they're mentally ill." There was a silence. Then the old man leaned closer to the screen. "Bella, that is the first intelligent thing anyone in this family has said to me this week. I am not going to tear your head off today." "That's funny, because I was just saying basically the same thing." "Shut up before I rip out your guts and have you gift-wrapped to the board." Nedry sat back, stung and sniffling, trying to look thoughtful in the way a cocaine enthusiast sometimes mistakes for dignity. At the secretary's desk nearby, Nadine had been taking notes with the timid precision of a church mouse filing documents for wolves. She was not supposed to speak during meetings like this. Everybody knew that. So when she quietly said, I might have an idea," every face in the room turned toward her. The old man's lips peeled back. "If you interrupt again," he said, "I'll paddle your behind like a schoolgirl. But since you've already managed to make everybody look at you, you may as well say it." Nadine swallowed hard. "Well, I didn't know Junior had autism until he took that test at the doctor's office," she said. "And And I didn't know I had an above-average IQ until I took one of those tests in a magazine. So maybe people just need a test, something they can take somewhere easy, so they can know if they're sad, and then maybe they'd know they should take a pill for it." Nobody said anything. Nadine, suddenly aware that she had perhaps spoken herself into unemployment, continued nervously. "Not that I'm saying everybody should, of course. I'm just saying people kind of like finding things out about themselves, even when they maybe shouldn't." The old man stared at her. Bella's eyes narrowed. Nedry looked around the room, unable to tell whether anyone had spoken English. Then the old man slowly smiled. "My God," he said, "the little idiot is a genius." Bella nearly cracked a tooth. The screen flicked, and now Stebner appeared in a cluttered lab below, blinking into a camera with the exhausted terror of a man who had not known peace since graduate school. "Stebner," barked the old man, "get upstairs before I come down there and stomp you into paste. I have a task for you." And that was how the Modal Multiple Personality Report was born, the MMPR, the Psych. 1,000-question computerized personality evaluation delivered through VT100 terminals wired into Gamora's networks and distributed with evangelical speed to pharmacies, clinics, bars, shopping centers, office lobbies, and mall kiosks. Bright screens, friendly prompts, little blinking cursors inviting ordinary people to sit down, answer honestly, and learn at last what was wrong with them. Its database had been compiled from thousands of patients diagnosed by Gamora's physician network, a remarkable web of medical professionals whose income rose in direct proportion to the number of disorders they managed to discover in a paying human being. The healthy control group, even more impressively, had been drawn heavily from Gamora employees, which meant that the machine's concept of normal had been shaped partly by clinical overdiagnosis and partly by some of the most predatory, narcissistic, impulsive, vain, coked up, sexually confused, spiritually rotten people ever issued business cards. The results were astonishing. People lined up for the Psych. They sat in pharmacies, they sat in bars, they sat beside potted palms in shopping malls while their children watched and their spouses pretended not to worry. They answered questions about mood, fear, desire, shame, rage, attachment, guilt, fantasy, memory, appetite, sleep, sex, violence, jealousy, grief, compulsion, vanity, faith, self-loathing, and secret longings. They would not have confessed to a priest with a gun to his head. And then the machine told them who they were. Sometimes it told them too much. A harmless little quiz might reveal buried trauma, unbearable dependency, private appetites, narcissism, addiction, codependence, real psychosis, real instability, or something even worse, an unflattering truth delivered with all the authority of a glowing green terminal. The public reaction was catastrophic and profitable. Millions flooded toward Ophidian, not because they trusted Gamora, but because once a person had stared into the little electronic mirror and seen backlit proof that he was damaged, twisted, fragile, repressed, unstable, dependent, grandiose, or secretly monstrous. Well, a pill began to sound less like medicine and more like a flotation device. At Gamora's executive level, the whole thing became a game. At 5 in the afternoon, when the serious work of the day gave way to drinking, snorting, gossiping, and summoning women to the upper floors for no purpose that would survive written documentation, the Psych became entertainment. Girlfriends were made to take it. Mistresses were made to take it. Massage therapists, delivery men, interns, valets, servants, secretaries, and terrified lower-tier staff were all encouraged, coaxed, or bullied into sitting at the terminal and allowing the machine to expose them for the amusement of people too medicated to blush. Bella delighted in the facial collapse that came right before tears. Nedry enjoyed the anger. Executives placed bets on whether a man would faint, punch a wall, accuse his wife, confess something criminal, or crawl under a desk and refuse to emerge until the fire department arrived. At one such gathering, with liquor out, powders open, and dignity long since declared non-essential, one junior executive made the mistake of murmuring that there was no true medical test for mental illness. That diagnosis was subjective, an opinion. Another executive hissed at him to keep that opinion to himself before the old man heard it and had him fed to accounting. Nedry had attempted the Psych 3 times, but he was so chemically scattered that by question 40 he could no longer remember whether yes meant yes or whether the keyboard was looking at him funny. Bella's case was worse in a more refined way. She was on so many legal pharmaceuticals, beauty compounds, stimulants, sedatives, and boutique formulations that Stebner's algorithm briefly displayed the words insufficient reality baseline and froze. Nadine had taken it quietly and read her printout without flinching. When Bella demanded to know what it said, Nadine shrugged and answered in that sweet, wounded little voice of hers that always made cruelty sound even uglier. "It said there were some things wrong with me," she admitted, "but I kind of already knew that. That's all right. I'm okay the way I am. I can't afford a doctor anyway. I don't know. I just want a nice boyfriend, I guess." No one in the room knew how to respond to that level of innocent sincerity, so they ignored her and looked for someone better. They found Animal. Animal had the broad shoulders, waxed confidence, and polished menace of a man who had spent his whole life assuming that force was character. He smirked when they told him to sit. He smirked when Nadine, under Nedry's instructions, entered his answers for him. He smirked halfway through the test. Then the printout arrived. His smile vanished. Below, in the laboratory, Stebner was in mid-argument with the old man over a monitor. Junior stood nearby, absent-mindedly toying with a strange headset from one of the side benches. Stebner pleaded his case in the weary tone of a man begging civilization not to set itself on fire. These tests should only be administered by trained personnel, he said. Interpretation matters. Context matters. You can't just hand a psychologically destabilizing printout to a man at a bar and expect. The old man cut him off. Send Junior upstairs, he snapped. This place is turning into a pigsty. Junior obediently took his mop and bucket and shuffled off toward the stairs. Nadine, standing closest, saw his eyes move down the page, saw confusion turn to offense turn to humiliation turn to naked rage. Whatever the Psych had found inside Animal, it had cut deep and cut true. His breathing changed. He looked around the room as if everyone present had personally witnessed him naked and ashamed in the town square. Then he exploded. He screamed at Nedry, at Bella, at the room, at the walls. He accused people of mocking him, judging him, setting him up. He frightened Nadine half to death, slammed a chair sideways, pointed a shaking finger at everyone in sight, and stormed out toward the stairwell in a full and glorious collapse of self-command. The party fell briefly silent. Then Bella laughed. What a psycho, she said. Junior, who had by then arrived from downstairs with his cleaning supplies, had observed the whole thing with his usual solemn honesty. When someone suggested that he should take the test next, one executive snickered that it would probably say he was mentally defective. Nadine's feelings were visibly hurt on Junior's behalf. Junior himself remained calm. No thank you, he said. I have chores in the penthouse. Moments later, Animal burst into the lab. He was no longer angry in the ordinary sense. The Psych had cracked something open in him. He was now one of those dangerous men who had glimpsed an unbearable truth and decided that murder might reseal it. He accused Stebner of insulting him, of humiliating him, of exposing weaknesses no one had the right to name. Cut to the penthouse. Junior, alone in the old man's private hospital room, had discovered a curious headset lying near the bed. He placed it on his head. The dangling wires began to glow. Junior's face changed. He seemed to hear something far away. Stebner, because he was Stebner, made the fatal mistake of answering honestly. The truth hurts, he said. Suddenly, Animal drew a pistol and emptied it towards Stebner, hitting him and just about everything else in the lab. Stebner flew backward into his equipment. Glass burst. Sparks spat from overloaded panels. Steam billowed for reasons known only to melodrama and Gomorrah wiring standards. Stebner fell to the floor, mortally wounded. Suddenly, time itself suddenly hiccuped. A flash of blue light. And there, impossibly, stood Vince, the bodyguard from a later disaster not yet meant to have happened, holding the strange time-reversing iPhone with the baffled expression of a man who had pressed the wrong button in the middle of destiny. Whoops, he muttered, still figuring this thing out. He vanished. Time reversed. Stebner's shattered equipment reassembled for an instant. The bullets unfired. Animal moved backward into his posture of accusation. And at that exact impossible seam in reality, from a dark corner of the lab, the dormant proxy robot came alive. Its television face flickered on. Its limbs snapped into motion with brutal purpose. Animal barely had time to turn before the machine seized him and dispatched him in a hideous storm of metal force, shrieking hydraulics, and the kind of swift industrial violence that would forever disqualify a company from describing itself as family-oriented. Stebner, stunned and half-sprawled amid his resurrected equipment, stared at the glowing screen on the proxy's head. There, for one brief and dreadful second, was Junior's face, calm, wide-eyed, childlike. And then, with perfect cheerful timing, it said, "Womp womp." The proxy shuddered, coughed sparks, vented steam, and collapsed back into silence. Everything went still. Stebner sat there in shock, alive only because time had misbehaved, and Junior had apparently reached into machinery through some corridor no human being should ever discover. At last, Stebner let out one small cry of relief. Then, trembling, he rose to his feet and slowly walked off into the cluttered shadows of his lab, perhaps for the first time in his career too frightened even to take notes. Because there are many profitable inventions in this world. A drug that creates dependence, a machine that manufactures despair, a test that tells frightened people exactly what they most dread hearing about themselves. But when sickness is defined by the men who stand to gain the most from its diagnosis, then the cure is never really the point. What Stebner built was not a tool for healing. It was a mirror polished by predators, a mechanism for finding the tenderest wounds in the human soul and billing by the bottle. And as for those who place such power in the hands of vanity, greed, and cruelty, they learned, as so many do, that every quiz eventually reveals the same final result. Somewhere, somehow, somebody is going to die horribly, especially in the executive suites of the atomic zone.